And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, would my cat's flea issue disqualify my latest cat circus application? And will my mother's newly refurbished local rec center now allow her to participate in aqua aerobics without getting another gigantic staph infection? And now, the podcast host who always keeps intimate details about his body on the down low, Pete Dominic.
That's right. You're never going to know the secrets that I keep, folks, about this perfect vessel I travel through life in. But if you're lucky and we get to meet in person at some point, I will show you my finger that has a scar down the middle of it that looks like an ass. I lovingly call it ass finger. All right, well, welcome to today's program, and thank you very much for tuning in, for downloading, for pressing play and subscribing, and for writing a review and all of the things that you can do to help support and promote the show. It's an awesome one today. I've got retired firefighter from the fire department of New York City, FDNY, 9/11 first responder, advocate, dad, all-around great guy. His name is Rob Serra, and he is the host of a new podcast called The Firefighters Podcast. It's produced by Paul Rykoff's media company, Righteous Media. It's really good, and it was an unbelievable conversation, really important. I'm very happy to have Rob on for the first time. Also, Peter Coyote joined us on Thursday night, and I've got the hangout, at least that part of it, from our Thursday night Stand Up with Pete Dominic hangout. It's the appearance by Peter Coyote, all the questions he took, and it was great. So, Rob Serra and Peter Coyote with the stand-up audience of over 80 people on Zoom on Thursday night. Awesome show for you. But first, I've got a robust and comprehensive news recap, as I do every Monday through Thursday. You can find it right here. Drops at 2 a.m. or thereabouts most days. I call it the last 24. In this case, it's the last 48, covering the weekend in news, COVID, politics, Russia. I had some other random things about Aaron Rodgers. Let's do it. All right, let's get to it, shall we? Tons of headlines in the COVID news section.
COVID news.
All right, let's see. What do we have? First, new study says unvaccinated seniors are nearly 50 times more likely to be hospitalized than their boosted peers. So I'm not sure exactly how much more evidence you need to know, but I mean, 50 times more likely is a convincing statistic for me. Hey, you're 50 times more likely to succeed if you just do this. Okay, thank you. I'm going to do it. Thanks. That didn't take a lot of thought. Moving on. The Beijing Olympic Committee has lowered COVID testing threshold again before the games begin. I guess they're like February 3rd or 6th or something. I don't know. I'm not watching. Beijing officials urge COVID-19, quote, emergency mode before the Winter Olympics. Also, what else do I have COVID for you? I don't have COVID for you. I hope you don't have COVID. Anyway, it's this. Austria has approved a COVID vaccine mandate for adults. Ooh, I want to live there, I think, then, except for some of the things about Austrians. Team USA is now 100% vaccinated against COVID ahead of the Beijing Olympics. Dr. Fauci said on TV, I think I got some Fauci coming up, that he's confident Omicron cases will peak in February at some point. Hospitals are asking workers with COVID to return, even if they may be infectious, because that's how bad these hospital employees have been sidelined. Overwhelmed resources have upended nearly 2 years now of strict protocols there. Thousands descended on D.C. for an anti-vaccine mandate rally. I've got Robert F. Kennedy spreading nonsense coming up. NBA legend, speaking of nonsense, NBA legend John Stockton has made a bizarre claim that more than 100 pro athletes have actually died from the COVID vaccine. And in an interview with Spokane, Washington newspaper, the Basketball Hall of Famer asserted without a shred of evidence that scores of athletes have died in the middle of competition from the vaccines. And Gonzaga, the college, I think that's where he went. They suspended his season tickets because he failed to follow the mask mandate. Wow, that's surprising. I always thought he was a reasonable and thoughtful guy. It's just proof that anybody can be fooled, maybe. I don't know. Just a couple more. New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern canceled her wedding amid Omicron outbreak in New Zealand. Airlines in Europe say they're flying near empty planes as Omicron has derailed travel there. Booster shots in the U.S. have strongly protected against severe disease from Omicron variant, a new CDC study showed. And the FDA has approved the use of antiviral drug remdesivir as an outpatient therapy for people with COVID-19. And now some COVID-related sound. Here's Dr. Fauci on Sunday.
However, what we would hope that as we get into the next weeks to month or so, we'll see throughout the entire country the level of infection get to below what I call that area of control. And there's a big bracket of control. Control means you're not eliminating it, you're not eradicating it, but it gets down to such a low level that it's essentially integrated into the general respiratory infections that we have learned to live with.
All right, so we've learned to live with it, and it'll be capable. We've been hearing that for a long time. Now let's listen to the governor of Florida, who is really just terrible, has gotten this so wrong, and here he is spreading more nonsense. Can't really hear the reporter ask him, but he asked him straight up if he had gotten his booster yet.
So that's something that, I think people should just make their own decisions on. I'm not going to let that be a weapon for people to be able to use. I think it's a private matter. We've worked hard to be able to protect people so they don't lose their jobs on that. I have said publicly that, the FDA recommended it against boosters for people in my age group, and the CDC overrode that. And I think that was based on politics. I don't think that was based on science. 2 of the top FDA people actually resigned in protest. Many people didn't hear about that. You know why? Well, because it didn't fit the narrative. I can tell you, if you had a different president of a different party, that would have been hair on fire stuff, that people would have been able to do. So in Florida, they've been available for people. People can make their own decisions on it, but it's not been something that, that we've been telling people in my age group, to go out and do.
Well, of course, you should be telling people in your age group to go out and do. And of course, the booster has been recommended for people his age by all the authorities and experts. Of course, he got his booster, and of course, he's lying. And the FDA officials did not resign due to disagreement with giving boosters. They resigned because they were upset that they were not being given to everybody before everyone was vaccinated, which is an ethical, controversial thing. But that's not at all, of course, what Ron DeSantis said. And he also said this about nurses. He spread more nonsense about women and pregnancy.
A lot of these nurses have had COVID. A lot of them are younger. Some of them have, they're trying to have families. There's a whole bunch of things that they have going on. And so they don't want to be forced to do it. So you have places in other states, they will fire the nurses because of the vax.
All right, enough spreading disinformation. The governor of one of the most populous states in the country, just constantly spreading misinformation and just telling bold-faced, blatant lies. Well, here's the former director of the CDC on that issue, because there's new research about pregnant women and the COVID vaccine versus getting COVID.
The evidence is very clear. There has been no evidence that there's any adverse effect on childbearing from having the vaccine. In fact, there's now increasingly strong evidence that getting COVID in pregnancy is bad for the child and bad for the mother. So vaccination is extremely important. And
all right, we go from one very smart doctor to one really not smart one. I mean, he was apparently a miracle brain surgeon, but he has lost all his credibility. Ben Carson.
They're not dealing with natural immunity. And of course, the reason they won't deal with natural immunity is because it eliminates the compulsion to inject everybody with this virus. So they're not going to recognize anything that gets in the way of that, because it's a tremendous mechanism to be able to control people. And I think sometimes some of the politicians just are drunk on power.
Okay. I mean, I don't know what to say about that. You just let him speak his nonsense, and there's no reason to counter any of that. I just wanted you to hear that's Dr. Ben Carson on television yesterday. And here's the president's spokeswoman, Jen Psaki. She went on Fox News because they thought that would be an effective place for her to be right now. Apparently, some controversy about that. But here she is with the former Bush press secretary, Dana Perino.
I'm looking for a question or an answer on an off-ramp for Americans, because a lot of unvaccinated feel like they're being the scapegoats and second-class citizens, even though I want people to be vaccinated so that they're protected.
Sure. Well, first, let me say 75% of the country is fully vaccinated. All of those people did not vote for Joe Biden, and certainly they're not all Democrats. We know that mathematically. What the president's trying to do is protect the country, protect people from death. We also know from the CDC and from our scientists that you are 17 times more likely to be hospitalized and 20 times more likely to die if you are not vaccinated. So we're trying to provide people accurate information.
All right. And one more thing from our favorite epidemiologist that smart cousin Darcy turned me on to. Caitlin Jetelina says that the COVID-19 vaccine does not impact fertility, according to latest science. One of the top concerns among young adults and parents that COVID-19 vaccines may negatively impact fertility. We just heard about that with Ron DeSantis and Dr. Frieden. She writes, in fact, the latest Kaiser Family Foundation poll found 2 out of 3 parents are concerned the vaccine may affect their children's future fertility. Well, there is yet to be any scientific data to suggest this is remotely true. Just rumors and myths about COVID-19 vaccine effects on all aspects of reproduction and sexual functioning that have stemmed from a few specific things during the pandemic, which she writes more about in her newsletter and more about this study. But nothing, no science to worry about reproductive issues, fertility issues based on getting the vaccine. And finally, the final piece of audio and news I want to play for you on this installment of COVID News is Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who did all of the things and said all of the stuff. And this is from the anti-vax rally in D.C. that had several thousand people at it. Yeah, over the weekend. Here's RFK Jr., who's completely fallen off the cliff into the very, very deep end of fear.
Even in Hitler's Germany, you could cross the Alps into Switzerland. You can hide in an attic like Anne Frank did. I visited in 1962 East Germany with my father and met people who had climbed the wall and escaped. So it was possible. Many died doing it, but it was possible. Today, the mechanisms are being put in place that will make it so none of us can run and none of us can hide. Within 5 years, we're going to see 415,000 low-orbit satellites. Bill Gates says his 65,000 satellites alone will be able to look at every square inch of the planet 24 hours a day. They're putting in 5G to harvest our data and control our behavior. Digital currency that will allow them to punish us from a distance and cut off our food supply. Vaccine passports.
All right, well, I think he just about covered it, right? I mean, was that pretty much everything? I don't know if he missed any conspiracies or connecting them, but he got torn asunder in the media for obviously the Nazi comparisons. Jake Tapper writes, an ignorant, lying menace about that clip. Dr. David Gorski wrote, there was a time not long ago when Robert Kennedy Jr. got caught making Holocaust analogies about vaccines when a blogger wrote a post about it. He pressured that anti-vaxxer to delete the post, which disappeared, and now he's invoking Anne Frank in front of thousands. One more, Seth Maskett. Yes, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., you definitely have it tougher than Reed's notes. Anne Frank? And finally, one more. I've got some bad news for Bobby about Anne Frank. Turned out she couldn't hide in the attic. Just disgusting. All right, well, that is today's installment of COVID News. Now let's get to some other stories, some ugly politics over the weekend, things being said. The legend Newt Gingrich, who is one of the most unlikable folks ever, and former Speaker of the House, and now empty jack-o'-lantern head, was on Fox Business with Maria Bartiromo, Fox News, over the weekend, and he said the January 6th committee, they're all going to jail if Republicans take over Congress after the next election. He's not the only one, of course, to say that. Well, Liz Cheney saw that clip and tweeted, a former Speaker of the House is threatening jail time for members of Congress who are investigating the January 6th attack on our Capitol and our Constitution. This is what it looks like when the rule of law unravels. Well, here it is, old Newt.
You're going to have a Republican majority in the House and a Republican majority in the Senate. And all these people who've been so tough and so mean and so nasty are going to be delivered subpoenas for every document, every conversation, every tweet, every email because I think it's clear that these are people who are literally just running over the law, pursuing innocent people, causing them to spend thousands and thousands of dollars in legal fees for no justification. And it's basically a lynch mob. And unfortunately, the Attorney General of the United States has joined that lynch mob and is totally misusing the FBI. And I think when you have a Republican Congress, this is all going to come crashing down, and the wolves are going to find out that they're now sheep, and they're the ones who are, in fact, going to, I think, face a real risk of jail for the kind of laws they're breaking.
I love hearing Newt Gingrich talk about other people being mean and nasty. That sumbitch is the meanest and nastiest person, one of the top, I'd say one of the top people ever serve in Congress, certainly in power as the Speaker. He is one mean, conniving, sneaky son bitch. I spent some time with him. All right, moving on. Let's get to Senator Bernie Sanders making appearances on a couple of Sunday shows on Meet the Press and CNN's State of the Union. And he's laying out the situation right now in terms of the filibuster in the U.S. Senate, which is why he was on TV over the weekend.
You got 50 Republicans who don't want to do anything except criticize the president. And then you have, sadly enough, 2 Democrats who choose to work with the Republicans rather than the president, and who have sabotaged the president's effort to address the needs of working families in this country. Is it frustrating? It sure is. But my view, Dana, is we need a new direction, a new approach in the Senate. I think after 6 months of negotiating, so-called negotiating behind closed doors with Senators Manchin and Senator Sinema, we need to start voting. We need to bring important pieces of legislation that impact the lives of working families right onto the floor of the Senate.
All right, that was him on CNN. Here he is now with Chuck Todd on Meet the Press, NBC.
Because you have a Republican Party right now which is playing the obstructionist role. They stand for nothing except for wanting to cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid.
Very quickly, as perhaps the leading progressive voice in the Democratic coalition, can President Biden count on your vote in the Senate with almost any compromise he comes up with Manchin?
No, you got to look at, no, absolutely not. You're going to have to look at what that so-called compromise is.
All right, the president's spokeswoman, let's go back to her, Jen Psaki. She was also on The View. I think this is Friday, and she got criticized for this roundly from progressives, saying like she has no idea what she's talking about. But I think this is a good example of a clip that got taken out of context. If you see the whole interview, it's different. But does this not sit well with folks? Is she not taking things seriously enough? Here she is, Jen Psaki on The View.
So my advice to everyone out there who's frustrated, sad, angry, pissed off, feel those emotions, go to a kickboxing class, have a margarita, do whatever you need to do this weekend, and then wake up on Monday morning. We got to keep fighting. And what that means, Lindsay, is we have to keep talking to members about federal legislation. That's essential. That's something that can be permanent, that can make sure people's rights are protected. But we also need to make sure people are educated in states across the country about what their rights are, how they can vote, when they can vote, how to request an absentee ballot. There's a lot we need to do on that front, and that's going to rely on the energy and the anger of that activism as well.
I actually agree with that. I think that if you're going to be an effective activist, you can't be doing it all day, every day. I think you have to have time off, breaks, even vacations. So I think, I don't know why that was so controversial. If you have issue with it, let me know. I'd like to hear your take on it. All right, let's switch gears one more time and go to the final and potentially, outside of all things COVID, most disconcerting, timely issue, which is the potential war, an invasion of a sovereign nation, Ukraine, by Russia. Here is our Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, on CNN.
And we are in intense, regular, constant communication, consultation with allies and partners to make it very clear that these massive consequences will follow. So basically, at this point, Donna, the choice is Vladimir Putin's, and the paths are clear. Diplomacy, dialogue, seeing if we can build collective security in a way that is good for everyone is clearly the preferable path, but we're prepared either way.
Well, it seems inevitable. I mean, it seems inevitable. This is a really scary, intense situation. I'll be talking to guests about it this week. Here's a little bit more from our Secretary of State.
We want to make sure that even as Russia has shared its concerns with us, we and our allies, because we've been in very close coordination on this, make clear our concerns with the actions that Russia has been taking, and we look to see if we can address any of these concerns on a reciprocal basis. That's what diplomacy is all about. That's what the dialogue is all about. But one thing's equally important, even as we engage in diplomacy and dialogue, something that I do for a living, it doesn't take the word no out of your vocabulary. And as we're doing it, we're building up our defense, we're building up our deterrence to make sure that Russia understands that if it doesn't follow the diplomatic course, if it renews its aggression, there'll be very significant consequences.
Well, there was a lot more being talked about and being said on this issue. And as I talked about last week, I had probably one of the most talked about interviews of the week for sure was my conversation with Andrea Chalupa of Gaslit Nation. If you haven't heard that interview, people were really, really liked that one last week. This week, I think you're going to be talking about the hangout with Peter Coyote. And I think you're going to love my conversation with Rob Serra. That's coming up. But first, here is sad Aaron Rodgers, the quarterback of the Green Bay Packers and anti-vaxxer, and has quickly become a very unpopular guy. Used to be the most liked guy in the NFL, I think, and now not so much the case. He lost over the weekend, and the amount of joy that I saw on social media because he lost I almost felt bad for him. I didn't, but I almost did. I do feel bad for Green Bay Packer fans. Sorry, Kim.
Aaron, how would you describe how you're feeling right now after what just happened?
Yeah, I mean, a little numb for sure. Didn't think it was going to end like this. Disappointed in the offense. 10 points, obviously not enough. The defense, man, played outstanding. Special teams obviously hurt us. Taking points off the board, giving them points.
All right, there you go. Exhilarated interview, sad Aaron Rodgers. I do want to play this. It's a little bit longer. It's like a couple minutes back and forth with CNN's Brian Stelter and who I could take or leave, but certainly I love Bob Costas. I've always been a big Bob Costas fan. I'm a little biased. He was very nice to me one day when I met him at Aspen Ideas Fest. He was just beyond nice to me. I grew up in Syracuse. He went to Syracuse. We talked about that. He was just really kind, and I've always been a big fan of his. And I think his analysis here is important about NBC and the Olympics, his former employer. It's I think this is good, so I wanted to share a good little longer portion with you.
Bob, I know you're always asked about NBC, and you still have a lot of friends there.
Sure.
What are you hearing from those friends about the unique challenges covering the Beijing Games?
We should preface this by saying that no one could have anticipated COVID, no matter what the venue is, but the IOC deserves all of the disdain and disgust that comes their way for going back to China yet again. They were in Beijing in 2008. They go to Sochi in 2014. They're shameless about this stuff. And so this takes place not only amid COVID games of a year ago, but as you mentioned, the restrictions on press freedom and the sense that everyone there is being monitored in some way. We had that feeling in 2008 in Beijing. I think, if anything, it's been ramped up now. And it isn't just NBC, any network that broadcasts big sports events is simultaneously in a position, it's quasi-journalistic at best. You're reporting a news event and what surrounds it in the case of the Olympics. It isn't just what's confined to one game in a stadium. You're reporting on an event, but you're also promoting the event. Newspapers and CNN and whatever other outlets don't pay a rights fee to cover the White House or whatever they're covering. NBC pays a huge rights fee along with the production costs. They want people to watch it. It's a centerpiece of the entire network strategy. At a time where everything is fractionalized, very few things draw huge audiences. The NFL does, the Super Bowl, the Olympics do. They're part of a strategy. As you mentioned, generally speaking, Nightly News would be there. The Today Show would be there. It's almost 24/7 Olympic stuff. You promote your other upcoming programs. All of that is diminished. It's not gone, but it's diminished under these circumstances. And
these circumstances, so many of them are out of NBC's control, as you're saying. Of course. Is there anything they can control? They said this week, we will acknowledge the geopolitical context of these games. Is that a gentle way of saying we're gonna mention what's going on with human rights abuses, but we're just going to move on quickly as we can? My guess would be, and I have no inside information here, and I want to stipulate my great respect
for the job that my colleagues have done and undoubtedly will do under these very difficult circumstances. But I would anticipate that what they'll do is the very thing that you suggested. They will acknowledge the issues at the beginning and then address them only if something specific that cannot be ignored happens during the course of the games, which very well could happen. They're also up against it because of this. The late, great Jim McKay said to me when I began hosting the Olympics, and he had established the standard at ABC, remember, yes, it's a sports event, but it's a cultural panorama. It's a travel log. NBC has no ability under these circumstances to take people around China, to have people sharing the emotion of cheering crowds and family. All of that is reduced. Right. And even though people are used to sports events, in some cases, being broadcast remotely because COVID imposed that. And they'll be able to do a decent enough job from Stamford, Connecticut, with 90% of their coverage coming from there. But still, the announcers and the producers will not have the feel of the event. They won't have the personal contact with the people involved, and they won't be able to say, as Jim was able to say, as I was able to say through all those Olympics, I traveled around Australia. Right. I went to the Great Wall of China. Right. Give people some sense of what it feels to be at an event that's so large in its scope. That is just greatly reduced.
Have you ever seen a games like this where democracy versus autocracy, where competing political visions are so at the forefront? I mean, this, to some degree, it's always a subtext when these games travel around the world, but it feels like it's much more vivid this time. Yeah, it was there as a subtext in 2008, and I tried as best I could to address it. It was there in Sochi in 2014, and I did address it. We did pretty directly. But now I think there's just a greater understanding of everything that China represents. How given, obviously there are other great abusers of human rights around the globe, but given China's size, influence, and resources, you can make a very good case. Human Rights Watch. That's what I'm searching for. Human Rights Watch has said that it's very high on the list of the worst human rights abusers, and when you consider its size and influence, it may rank first.
All right, first is what he was saying, and I got to cut it off there, because it's almost 4 minutes, but I hope you appreciated that. I think it's really important to hear that's the big issue. That's the context that I think we need to hear from both a broadcasting point of view as well as a geopolitical point of view and human rights violations point of view on these upcoming games in China that are set to begin in just a couple of weeks now. All right, well, that is all of the sound that I've got for you, but I still have more headlines. It's time for the news dump. Pete Coat, take it away.
Roaming bear named Jimmy has the neighbors in a huff. Disrupted many deliveries for today's news dump.
Yeah, that's a real story. The moment an Amazon delivery driver came face to face with a bear has been caught on camera, and the delivery driver can be seen keeping his cool as the bear moves towards him, and it's unbelievable. You've got to see it to believe it. All right, what else do I have for you here? President Biden ordered a $15 minimum wage for all federal employees. That was set to take place, directed on Friday, and the rule will take effect on January 30th. The new pay guidance will impact close to 70,000 federal employees. That's pretty impressive news that has probably been undercovered. An airstrike in a Yemeni prison has killed 70. According to the Houthis in Yemen, Saudi-led coalition forces reportedly carried out an airstrike against a detention center, killing 70 and injuring 100, drawing condemnations from the United Nations, but nothing more, I suppose. A whole bunch of anti-abortion protests and pro-abortion protests I saw in New York City over the weekend. Families of U.S. Embassy personnel are starting to must evacuate Ukraine. That's when you know it's bad, it's getting bad, and a lot of concern about what's about to happen there. Aid ships finally reached Tonga. Aid flights from Australia, Japan, and New Zealand carrying food, water, medical supplies, and telecommunications equipment landed in Tonga over the weekend as the Pacific nation grapples with the aftermath of an underwater volcanic eruption and tsunami. Man, Tonga sounds like paradise except for what's going on there as a result of that horrible situation. Humanitarian talks with the Taliban have begun in Norway. 3 days of talks between Taliban delegation and the Norwegian government and several allied countries have started in Oslo amid a deteriorating humanitarian situation in Afghanistan. A 75-year-old French adventurer who was attempting to row across the Atlantic Ocean solo in this really cool rowboat that he could sleep in has disappeared after sending distress signals last week. The Portuguese Coast Guard found his boat. His name is Jean-Jacques Savine. How did I do? They found his boat, specially built capsule, overturned in near the Portugal on Friday. A terribly sad story, but dude sounded like a pretty impressive guy who had accomplished quite a bit in his life as an adventurer. Celebrated his 75th birthday just a couple weeks ago. 75 years old, and he was going to row across the Atlantic Ocean. Pretty ambitious, but I guess a good way to go out. And finally, a 29-year-old Irishman's alleged behavior on a flight to New York could potentially end in serious prison time. The man departed from Dublin January 7th, and initial leg of the journey was to end in Florida, where apparently he was going to start a job. But during the 8-hour flight, he repeatedly refused to wear a face mask despite being asked dozens of times by flight crew personnel. And then he apparently threw an empty can that hit another passenger in the head, bugged a passenger in front of him, and at one point he got up, walked in the first class cabin to complain about the food, and when he returned to his seat, he pulled down his pants and underwear and mooned the flight attendant and passengers. Well, guess what? He was taken into custody as soon as he arrived in America, charged with intentionally assaulting and intimidating a member of the flight crew, faces up to 20 years in prison, and has been released on $20,000 bail. Welcome to America, buddy. Well, nice job. Sounds like things are going great for you. Do we have the video on that guy? All right, well, that's all I've got on today's News Dump. Brought to you, by the way, by Truebill. Listeners are loving to take advantage of and saving money with Truebill.com/standup. That's where you got to go because you're paying for all kinds of subscription services. You don't even know it, and that adds up. Sometimes you don't even notice the monthly deductions from our bank accounts. Well, Truebill is a new app that helps you identify and stop paying for subscriptions you don't need, want, or simply forgot about. People save thousands a year with Truebill. They got over 2 million users that helped them save over $100 million. So start canceling your unused subscriptions at Truebill.com/standup. Go right now. Truebill.com/standup. Could save you thousands of dollars a year. You can thank me later. And thank you, Truebill, for sponsoring the show. Truebill.com/standup. Go do yourself and me a favor and check it out, folks. Over 80% of people have subscriptions they've forgotten about. You're probably one of them. I know I was. Truebill.com/standup now. All right, coming up, it's the Thursday night hangout, the tape of all of us hanging out with Peter Coyote, where listeners had amazing questions, really fun and funny, thought-provoking conversation. He ends with 2 hilarious jokes. Peter Coyote coming up. But first, before that, for the first time on Stand Up, a guy I met years ago at a commemoration of 9/11. I think it must have been 2019, as a matter of fact. I remember kind of where I was at for sure in my life. And the great Paul Rykoff invited me and several other folks to come down to a very special dinner. And Paul has been friends with Rob Serra for a really long time. And Rob is an amazing guy who's now hosting a podcast on Paul's network, Righteous Media, that you've absolutely got to check out. It's really, really good. It's called the Firefighters Podcast with Rob Serra. He's a hero FDNY firefighter. He responded to 9/11 like the day he became a firefighter. And after, I think, like 13 years, he had to retire from all kinds of injuries he'd suffered in addition to 9/11 related illnesses. And he became one of the most well-known, well-spoken advocates and activists to help get health care for all those who responded to 9/11 and lived down there. He worked with a bunch of other guys, first responders, including The Daily Show's Jon Stewart, to get that money. He's a great guy and an interesting guy. And I think this interview is fascinating. Talking to a firefighter like Rob the way I got to with this, it really is great. And definitely got to check out the podcast. Thefirefighters.us is the website for Righteous Media's The Firefighters Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce you to the first time on Stand Up. It's Rob Serra. All right, I've just told you all about Rob Serra, and now I've got him on a video link, and it's great to see you, Rob. Thank you very much for joining me, and congratulations on the new podcast, which is important and really, really well done. Thanks for joining me.
All right, Pete, thanks. Appreciate you saying that.
Yeah.
I'm trying.
You weren't set up for a career in media, but now you've got a career in media.
I kind of stumbled my way into it. The same with politics, I guess.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, I want to get to all that and why it was, but I guess the most crazy, fascinating thing about your life story, maybe, I'm sure there's a lot at this point, but that you were a rookie and graduated FDNY Academy like the day before 9/11.
Yeah, well, we technically hadn't even graduated yet. They were doing some pilot program where we were supposed to go to the field training for a few months in the middle of the academy, which doesn't really make sense. But yeah, we finished up on the 10th, and that was it.
So you're sitting there with brand new gear, and everybody's busting your balls. It's day one. They're hazing you as a rookie.
Well, yeah, I was on a bus going to ground zero, and I guess it was more like nervous ball breaking than anything, right? We didn't know what we were going into. But yeah, there's all these old salty dudes sitting around me, and I'm sitting there pulling tags off my gear with my shaved head. I was 21. I must have looked like I was 15. And they were laying into me pretty good. But,
why did you become a firefighter?
I was an English major, so the job opportunities weren't really there. But seriously, though, it's kind of the family business. My grandfather, I have an uncle and an older brother who's a fireman. I was in college. He signed me up to take the test and basically forced me to do it. I took it. I got 100, and they called me like 2 months before I graduated, and I couldn't say no. I figured I'd give it a shot. I planned on going to law school or grad school or something, which, eventually I did. But everything got put on hold after 9/11. That was kind of changed everyone's plans,
Is there a difference between FDNY and every other fire department, or is it firefighter's a firefighter? Or is it different like cities where I feel like, now I'm going to say a lot of ignorant things about firefighting and firefighters, and you're going to tell me I feel like the real hard job for firefighters tends to be in buildings and structures that have a lot of floors on them. So if you work in a city with buildings that have 5, 10, or 100 floors, then that's a different kind of firefighting, almost a different than a house fire or than a smaller town. Is that a thing? Am I making any?
No, that's definitely a thing. There aren't many cities that have an aggressive interior attack like New York does, or Boston, Detroit. A lot of cities, they do what they call surround and drown, so basically they just throw the hoses in the window, I'm sure there's other cities out there that use an interior attack, but those are the major ones. But as far as firefighters go, we're all the same, we're all doing the same thing. We're all, volunteer.
It doesn't matter. I mean, I'm sure
it doesn't matter.
I'm sure you bust balls, but it doesn't matter that one job or even one precinct within a department is clearly a lot more dangerous than another precinct or another department in another part of the country or something. You're all the same.
Oh, yeah. And that's part of the ball breaking.
Right. Right.
The busier area you work, the more you give it to the guys who work in the slower places. Sure.
I mean, I would feel like they'd be like, dude, I responded to 9/11. Go get that cat out of a tree kind of thing. Is that it? Am I onto something?
I lost a neighbor that way. I came home from work one day and she asked me if I could help get her cat out of the tree. And I said, have you ever seen a dead cat in a tree? and she said, no. I said, well, there's your answer. She never spoke to me again.
That's really fun. That's really funny and a little mean. Oh, right. God, that's hilarious. So when you're, a rookie, I mean, I hate to bring you to walk you through it, but I certainly think it gives you a tremendous amount of credibility and obviously the podcast as well, to talk about 9/11 at this point. Reliving that, I realize is not a fun thing for you, but I do think it's kind of an important thing. And so, what if anything, how do you talk about it 21 years later? Your personal experience is what I'm asking about.
It's difficult. I don't really talk about it much other than through interviews or in my show. My wife lost her dad that day. So obviously 9/11 is a big part of our lives, but I try not to get into my experiences because I don't like to dredge up stuff for my family, because they don't really know exactly what happened to him, and I kind of have an idea. So I try not to talk about it with them too much. Actually, funny you say that because my son's hockey coach came up to me today and he's like, I had no idea that you were a fireman on 9/11. You never talked. I'm like, well, it's not going to walk up to somebody and just, say that to them. But ironically, we were in Pennsylvania and a fireman from Philly recognized me and came over to me and started talking to me about it. And I guess they overheard it. So to answer your question, fireman, no matter where you are, we always seem to find each other.
Well, your face has been all over the news because you've been an advocate for firefighters' healthcare. So that's just to clear up, folks, why you would be recognized. But you've been out front, the tip of the spear on this campaign, and I want to get to that. But real quick, what was your father-in-law's name? We'll just remember him and bring him back.
His name was Vincent Lido. He worked at Cantor Fitzgerald. He was a vice president. He was I don't know exactly what floor, but another one of those tragic stories. He had a pregnant assistant, and he had a visitor coming in at right around 8:30, and her job was to go down and bring the guests up. And since she was almost 9 months pregnant, he told her to stay and sent down, the intern, and then the mother-to-be and my father-in-law ended up passing away, and the intern lived, which is how we know the story, because he was sent down, and while he was down there,
Jesus,
the planes hit. Yeah,
Jesus, wow.
Yeah, Cantor Fitzgerald was actually the biggest loss.
Yeah, that's
more so than the FDNY.
That's where one or two guys I knew worked too, and died as well. So, what about the response? I mean, take me through what happened. I mean, you were on that rubble, which basically burnt for 90 days. I lived in the city at that point. I remember, just going down there, obviously, and then just smelling it. I mean, you couldn't get away from it. But you were, I don't think, most New Yorkers were really harmed by it. But if you were on that, breathing it every day, I mean, maybe they were, I don't know, then it's very possible that there's a lot of damage. Now there's a tremendous amount of proof 21 years later, and most folks know, I think, about the fight and know that a lot of guys have died or are struggling. If you know anybody in FDNY, at least somebody who knows somebody who is. So it's your second day, or I guess the next 3 months. Were you on that pile every day?
I wasn't on it every day. The way that they set up our schedules was we basically did 24 on, 24 off. So that means the entire firehouse was there every other day. So they would keep 5 or 6 guys to man the rig, and everybody else would go down there. But I was brand new. So the captain that I had was a great guy, Captain McNally, and he made it a point to make sure I learned how to do my job because that was what they were supposed to be doing. So I went down there whenever I wasn't on the rig. They would send me down there. But yeah, for the most part, guys were going down there on the day off. But just to add what you just said, it wasn't just the people directly on the pile that are getting sick. That cloud, if you remember, was covering the entirety of Lower Manhattan.
Yeah.
There are over 100,000 people in the healthcare program now. So it's not just first responders. There's the school students who were sent to school back in that zone. They're having a really hard time because they have to get health insurance and life insurance and start their lives, but they're all coming down with the same illnesses that we are, same cancers. And so it's not just us. And certainly you didn't have to actually be there either. Every time the fire truck went to ground zero and came back, it came back full of dust. Your clothes came back full of dust. The firehouses were full of dust for those first 3 or 4 months too. So it wasn't just the guys who were down there. People were bringing it home in their cars. We've had mechanics who were working on the vehicles in the shops come down with 9/11 cancer just from being in the dust, miles away.
Wow. So yeah, I mean, you can speak to, the research and investigations that have been done in terms of what kind of toxins were there, but at least 160 toxins that we know of. From one report I read, thousands of gallons of jet fuel burning for 90 days. There were chemicals literally created that day because of the mix. So, and you ate down there and you slept down there, and it goes through your skin, your eyes, and your bodies in every way. So, Rob, I know that you've had all kinds of health struggles. What have you dealt with? You were forced to retire. Tell me what happened to you and your body and your health.
I noticed it right away. That night while I was there, I got a bloody nose because they gave us those paper N95 masks, which everyone knows what they are now, but they didn't do much back then.
Right.
So you couldn't wear it for very long. My nose bled probably for like 3 or 4 hours till I passed out. So that's really where it all started for me. And then I started getting the sinus issues, which is very common. I had sinus polyps. I have nodules on my thyroid, so I have autoimmune issues. I have neuropathy and a few other autoimmune things. I'm sure there's things that I've dealt with that I'm going to forget to even say because it's been 20 years of dealing with this nonsense. But I'm one of the lucky ones. I haven't been diagnosed with cancer yet, but we've had, I believe it's over 3,000 members of the FDNY diagnosed with cancer so far. We've had 265 pass away, I believe. But the illnesses run everything from those sinus issues I mentioned to brain cancer, glioblastoma, weird cancers too. Like we had 40 or 50 men with breast cancer, which is rare. We have, we're getting cancers that you're not seeing in our demographic. So it's basically could be anything. I mean, we now know that, like you just said, there were 160 toxins, but any one of them is enough to kill you, 400 tons of asbestos. And we're just now hitting the latency period for asbestos-related diseases. So we don't really even know what's going to happen. The last 20 years has been pretty bad, but now is when the clock really starts,
So you kind of
look back. Yeah, sorry.
Well, I was just thinking what it sounds like is you kind of just might think that your body's a ticking time bomb. Do you live with a certain sense of anxiety, like knowing that you've already struggled a lot, that as you age, it turns into something, cancer or something?
I feel like I aged more rapidly. Now that the term long COVID is popular, right? People feel like, their body's changed. And for me, that happened when I was in my 20s. I remember going for my lung test and the guy saying, "Oh, your lungs aren't too bad. You're in like the 50 to 55-year-old range." I was like, "Yeah, but I'm 28 years old. What do you, So basically that's how I felt. I've basically felt like I've had the flu, for 15 years, different variations. Like it just never goes away. You just always, any type of toxin, smoke, dust, allergens. It's like a kick to the face.
So how long
lights up a cigarette next to you?
How long were you an active duty firefighter after 9/11 until the point you were forced to retire?
Almost 12 years, a little shy of 12. I retired because of 9/11 illnesses, but I had a bunch of other injuries right towards the end. I had a rough couple of years. My exit wasn't so graceful. I had a building collapse, so I've had a couple of neck fusions. I had 5 or 6 concussions, rig accidents. It was a rough. On top of the 20 sinus infections, I was in the hospital. Dealing with that nonsense. So it was just it was a rough exit for me. And it took me about a year or two to decompress.
Jeez, I had no idea about that, Rob. You had a building fall on you?
Not a whole building. It was a 1-story, and I could walk you through that one. Basically, if you know anything about firefighting, you know that on 1-story buildings or on top floor fires, we cut a hole right over the fire so it can vent out. And I was inside with the nozzle. It was snowing, of course, so there's a foot of snow outside. They cut the hole over the fire, and it fell right on my head. Knocked me out and, created all sorts of neck problems for me and the guy behind me. But, it was just a bad break. I just was in the wrong spot, a couple feet over, and I might have been fine. But
you talk to me about the work that you and so many others have done advocating for first responders and everybody else to uncover the proof and try to, I know there's always been controversy about the connection between that day and day subsequently and the actual health issues that there have been, but most people probably follow this at least a little bit. You guys been fighting for years. What has your role been? What was that fight like? I know you got I've seen you get real angry plenty of times throughout that. So I kind of just want to have you take me through what was so upsetting and what was so difficult throughout that fight, and then eventually just get to, I guess, where you're at now. But just tell me about what your role was and what you've achieved.
I started out just on my own. It was right around the time I retired, and I was angry. I was sick, and I was trying to come to peace with all the crap that I'd seen in my career. And all of a sudden, the droga bill was set to expire, and there was no urgency to get it renewed. So the droga bill was basically a Health and Compensation Act, which covered all your health care for any illnesses that could be linked to 9/11, and compensation for your family. So if you ended up not being able to work or passing away or something, you were compensated. And that was set to expire, and it ended up expiring. So I just basically started an online, campaign on my own, and then hooked up with other advocates, Ray Pfeiffer, who became my mentor, and John Fiel and John Stewart, which I'm sure everybody knows all about by now. And I started going down to Washington with them back in 2014, 2015, just to tell my story and put a face to, I don't know if you've ever lobbied in Washington, man, but it's a slow process, and to get people to listen to you and to actually care is difficult, and what made me so angry was the way politicians talk about 9/11 and the way they all like to prop us up and use us once a year. And then when I'd go into their office, and I know that the congressman would be in the back office, and he's got pictures of 9/11 all over his wall, but he won't come out and meet with us or shake our hands or give us 5 minutes to present our case, So it was a wake up call for me, because I always thought, like, what do you mean they're not going to take care of us? Like, it seems like a no brainer. Our country was attacked. We went there. You lied to us, admitted that you lied to us.
Yeah. I wonder why it's so. I mean, I understand, how it works to try to get something done, get attention, get legislation passed, but you'd think it's a lot harder to get an environmental regulation passed, or, something like lobbying for, like, marriage equality years ago, or something else, maybe a little more controversial. This never really seemed very controversial to me. What was so hard about getting health care and getting taken care of for the heroes that responded to 9/11? Why was that ever controversial? Why wasn't that always a slam dunk? Was it too much money? Was it not enough proof? I mean, why would politicians not take your cause and champion it? I never really understood why they wouldn't give you everything you wanted and more.
Right. Why? There's a two-part answer to that.
It's politically. I don't see the political downside. It's clearly not a money thing, it would think.
Well, I don't think it's a money thing. Well, they that's what they would use. They would say it's the money. What's the pay for? The biggest problem that I could see is that they don't like putting permanent bills on the books, right? The only other one is the black lung bill, and the nuclear power plant workers. So they don't like putting permanent bills on. Our bill technically isn't really permanent. They gave us 75 years, but we'll all be dead by then anyway. But they don't like giving out permanent bills. They told us, they like to control the money. They like to make sure they know. Well, at the time they were saying they wanted to make sure there was no fraud, which is why they were only giving us 5 years at a time, even though at the time there were 0 cases of fraud, thousands of deaths. I mean, we had all the proof. We had all the scientists, the doctors. We had everything we needed. So I think what you just said is true. It just became political. It became, well, what are we going to get out of it? In 2015, the bill was set to pass, and Mitch McConnell pulled it out because he wanted to lift the embargo on selling domestic oil overseas. So essentially, it wasn't worth helping us unless his friends can sell some oil. 2019, it became a different story, but it was always, both sides, which is what I've come to realize, is that both sides always benefit from this fight. You know, everybody, they both get something out of it. They both benefit from this taking 20 years because it comes up every election cycle, right? I mean, 2019, they tell us the bill's permanent. We're going to be taken care of for 75 years. And now, to this day, right now, they're trying to get more funding. Well, you told us it was taken care of in 2019. So it just so happens now that we have midterm elections coming up, the 9/11 fund needs more money. So, you know, it's hard to tell what people's intentions are, or you know, even the people who claim to be on your side, if they're doing it to help you or to help themselves. It's hard to say. The further removed they get from that situation, I realize that, you know, we were being played all around, which is
when you say
part.
both sides, you mean like Democrats and Republicans to win elections?
Yeah.
What about the New York politicians? You know, the senators and the congressmen from the districts representing the first responders, as well as just, you know, New York in general. I mean, I felt like they were always on board. Schumer and whoever was, you know, certainly Gillibrand. It would seem. I don't know. I mean, the people, the politicians closest to you specifically, I would think would be at great peril if they didn't support you. But were they? I mean, were the New York politicians on board?
Sure. I mean, they were on board. They had to be. I mean, I think it would, kind of be political suicide in New York to not support us.
Sure.
But at the same time, how come we were only getting 5 years at a time? We could have. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure they had to do what they had to do to get us that 5 years. But I feel like it should have been made permanent in 2010, the first time it came around, or the second the EPA and Christy Whitman admitted that they lied to us. Then what are we even talking about? The EPA was, you know, through the back channels, we were getting the reports of what was in the air early on from the people with the meters. If you were down there and you were standing next to a guy with a meter, he would tell you, put a fucking mask on, you know, like they would tell you that it was bad. So it's hard for me. You know, I know they've done a lot and certainly they helped get the bill passed, but I have a problem when it's still coming up.
Right.
When it's 2022 and it's still a campaign issue, then what are we doing?
So where are you at now in terms of what you're fighting for?
Well, now they're fighting to get more funding into the healthcare program, which I don't understand how it wasn't funded properly from the beginning. I mean, I know we are getting sick more rapidly than they expected, but they were expecting us to get sick, you know? So I don't know. That's what I mean. It doesn't make sense to me. Why are we even talking about this? And it's not fair. It's not fair that you know, like this year on the 20th anniversary of 9/11, you have people who are sick, battling cancer, battling PTSD and all these other illnesses, and they turn on the TV and the first thing they see is the 9/11 healthcare programs running out of money. Well, you know, and then they start, you know, myself included, I have to go on TV the day before 9/11 and talk about this when I should be with my wife or with my family. You know, why am I wasting my energy fighting for something that we should have already been taken care of? And while you're scaring the crap out of people who have PTSD and have these illnesses, and now they're worried that their families aren't going to be taken care of, or that they might lose their house if they get cancer, like it's just frustrating. And they always seem to bring it up at the same time of year, and it's just, I've had enough. You know?
Yeah, I know you had enough years ago too. So yeah, so how many guys do you know, or do you know, maybe that you know, or whether or not you know them, have died? You know, that you knew well. I mean, you must have lost a lot more guys, I would imagine, to 9/11 related illnesses than to fires or to on the job death, I would imagine.
Yeah, well, cancer in general is the biggest killer of firefighters right now. And that's a whole, I don't know if you saw that episode, but there's a whole nother issue, which is very closely related to this with the chemicals that they use to make firefighting gear fire resistant is causing cancer. So I mean, I know a lot of people who've had 9/11 cancer and beat it, but also I would say, I don't know, close friends, probably half a dozen, you know, friends, acquaintances, you know, hundreds. You know, we've lost 260 in the fire department alone. You know, my brother-in-law is a cop. His father was a cop. He died of 9/11 cancer.
Yeah, important to mention.
Ray
it's not,
Pfeiffer. Yeah, it's
not just FDNY. Obviously, it's
not. And it's not just first responders. It's
right.
You know,
I want to talk about the podcast and what you've been doing with
Sure,
it.
yeah.
But before we do, just one more question about you. How are you doing? Like, how do you deal with the emotional struggle? And when does it, if you don't mind, I mean, like, what is it like? How have you dealt with it? I mean, you got a family, you're a great dad, you're a dedicated dad. And how are you doing? Like, what kind of emotional issues do you have to deal with having dealt with all of this?
It's a cliche, but every day is different. I find a different way to get through every day.
So is every day a struggle? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. I mean, physically I deal with a lot of pain. You know, I have, rods and a cage holding my neck together. And I have, the neurological issues are, they're painful. Neuropathy is painful. I can't walk very far without my feet going completely numb. It's just, besides the physical pain, that dredges up the emotional pain because it's hard to forget about 9/11 or forget about, having a building fall on your head when you feel it all day long. So I just, when I zone out when I have to, people, they might think I have like resting bitch face, but I'm not. I'm usually not angry. I'm just in pain, and I zone out, and I use different techniques to find a better place. But I have 3 kids, so I have to be here. I have to be present for them as much as I can, and that's what my focus is. I deal with pain and all that stuff because they need to have a dad. They're little. They need to have some sort of normalcy because I know I'm probably not going to be here for a bulk of their lives.
I've heard you say that. I heard you say that, I think, like several years ago at a thing. And what makes you, is that just a feeling you have that you're going to like die at a, unnaturally young age, or
I just think there's only so much your body can fight off and take, I'm still getting over COVID, right? Which was my biggest fear of getting it in the first place, is that my immune system is already fighting all day.
When did you?
When did cancers? It really is a ticking time bomb. If you look back to, I was going to try to get into this earlier, but there was a fire in New York City in 1975, the New York Phone Company fire. Firefighters know about it, but the public, for the most part, doesn't. I think within 29 years. 699 firefighters who responded all died of cancer.
Jesus.
And that was one toxin. It was PCBs. So, the way it's happening, I'm seeing my friends get sick one by one. You get the phone call, this guy's got cancer, that guy's got cancer. It's just happening, so I think it's only a matter of time. Yeah. I think I'd be foolish not to think I was going to get it. So I just live my life like I said, if you're expecting it, then it's not a surprise. And I do as much for them now as I can. So,
well, it's great that you're doing this podcast, and I'm really happy to be talking with you anytime I get the opportunity, Rob. Always been, really interested in your story, and always been supportive of your advocacy and everything you've done. You're a great guy, obviously. And so I want to just, tell me about the podcast, the Firefighters podcast. It's what do you do once a week?
We're on every other week for now. I started out once a week, but then I got COVID and then
you just recently
need to take a little break. But maybe we'll get back there. Again, this is something my biggest fuel to do this was my kids. I want them to hear these stories. And even if I do happen to live another 20, 30 years, I don't think these are conversations I could ever really have with them.
Right.
It's tough stuff to talk about. It's easier to talk about with counselors or other firemen or whoever, or podcast hosts, I think, than to talk about with your kids. So that was my biggest fuel. And also, I wanted to give other people a chance to tell their stories, because so many people like you have had me on their show. They've given me a platform when I needed one to get those bills passed. So if I can do that, pay that forward, that's cool too. And I hope people like to listen to it. I think we talk about stuff that the public generally doesn't hear about. I mean, I know it's called the Firefighters Podcast, but I think anybody can listen to it.
It's definitely not. It's definitely not inside baseball. That's for sure. And I wanted to ask you, one of your most recent episodes actually deals with or addresses this devastating fire at the Bronx apartment. And you have a firsthand account on this episode, which just dropped last week, on the 14th, where you talked to this guy Lloyd Mitchell. But I just wanted to ask you at least about one or two fires or incidents that you talked about on the podcast, because I still don't know that much about what happened to Bronx. But my understanding is it was one of the worst losses of life in New York City. No firefighters lost their lives, right? But like, how many is it? 19 people and kids? Bunch of kids.
It was, I don't know if it was up to 9. It was at 17, but I know there were a few in critical. I think 8 or 9 kids. So
people should listen to that podcast, but just give me a bit of what you learned. What happened that day? What was that fire about? Why was it so bad?
It was cold, and the building didn't have heat, or there were boiler problems, so they were using space heaters to stay warm, and apparently one was plugged in for days without being turned off, overheated, started a fire, and I don't know how the window got open, or if it gave way. When the occupants left the fire apartment, they left the door open, and with a window open and the door open in a high-rise building, you're just creating, like a blowtorch. So I think that, from what I can tell, most of the people didn't do what you're supposed to do, which is stay in your apartment, just shelter in place. If your building's fireproof, you're much better off just staying with your door closed, and you put some blankets or towels under the door, and you just wait for the fireman to put it out. But everybody left their apartment, everybody left their doors open, which sounds like it created chaos in the stairwells, which is where they found most of the people who were overcome by the smoke, unfortunately.
Is that how most people die in fires? Smoke inhalation before they get set on fire?
Well, I think you probably pass out before you burn.
Right.
If you're that close to the fire, you're probably burning up instantly. But otherwise, I would say smoke inhalation.
So, do you guys in New York or anywhere else, do you know that certain buildings or even certain neighborhoods are maybe not as up to code, or the landlord? I mean, aren't there always issues? Don't you always find out issues later on that in this case already the boiler wasn't working, so these people had to resort to these space heaters? In a way, it's like, why wasn't the heat on the coldest days of the year? Like, would you look at a building or a neighborhood and be like, oh man, these buildings, they're not up to code, or they're not, whatever. I mean, I know in some of the Jewish communities, they use these hot plates because they're not allowed to cook on that day or whatever. So that was a horrible fire where a lot of people, Orthodox Jewish people, died a few years ago, I feel like, in Brooklyn. Like, what are your expectations of certain neighborhoods and communities for different reasons, and the people who own the buildings and codes? What's there to know about that?
Absolutely. In New York, firefighters do building inspections, so the buildings in your area very well. That was a city building in the Bronx, so their landlord is well known for not upkeeping their buildings. The MYCHA, whatever it's called, they have all sorts of issues. The doors never function properly. The boilers are always breaking. The elevators are always breaking. I don't know, if you've ever been in the projects, you've seen the state of most of these buildings. But you do know who the bad landlords are. That's why we do these inspections, hopefully to catch like illegal subdivisions and stuff like that. And you're right on with the Jewish community. I worked in Williamsburg. Those are things you came to expect, especially on Saturdays or during the holidays. It's like,
what is that? It's a workaround because of their religious observance doesn't allow them to use certain devices or something, and so they do you understand?
Yeah, I don't fully understand it. I know like the elevators just stop on every floor because they can't hit the button.
Yeah, I know. I'll consult a rabbinical scholar on that one. But
they would call us to come in and shut the stove off.
Right. Yes, I've heard that. Yes.
Yeah.
I've been asked that. as well. You know, I'm not allowed to work. Can you do this or that? It's just bizarre. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I don't fully get it either.
Yeah, don't let me go off on fundamentalist religions. All right, so let me talk to me about another episode of the Firefighters podcast, another guest or another situation that you talk about. You talked to an 89-year-old guy, Don Blaskovich, at the beginning of the podcast. That's a really interesting episode. You've talked to some women, obviously. I'd be really interested in hearing from women or even minority firefighters. I know it's a bit of a newer endeavor or place to be for folks. So pick anything you want from the podcast and tell me about another episode.
Sure. I mean, we're certainly going to hear from some more women. I have one coming on next week. So I try to envelop the entire firefighting community, not just firefighters themselves. You know, I had Diane Cotter on, who's a fire wife and a fire mom. She's the one who's been spearheading the fight to get these cancer-causing chemicals out of our gear, because her husband came down with cancer. And if you read her research, it's hard to argue with her, but you know, she doesn't have the money and the funding that DuPont and all those companies have.
Right. Or the lawyers.
So that's an area where, you know, we're going to go down that road a lot until that gets rectified. And I had Tina Constantino, who is a crisis specialist. I don't remember exactly what episode that was, but basically that episode was just a therapy session for me. I responded to the plane crash in Queens a couple months after 9/11, and that one, that's probably the one that I still deal with the most.
Oh, because of what you saw with your eyes?
What I saw and what we had to do. You know, that plane went straight down, full of fuel. By the time I got there, everything was mixed together. You know, so removing the bodies and the parts of the plane was not easy, and not, you know.
That's the job of firefighters to pick up like dead bodies.
Yeah.
And how do you experience? I mean, you hear that in people who are in combat, or even people who live in certain communities where there's a lot of violent crime. You know, especially when you're a kid, is one thing. When you're an adult, you can kind of understand it cognitively better. But I mean, how do you ever? Obviously, you're never the same, right? I mean, like it's always there. You can't unsee things. You can't unexperience experience you had. You just got to keep working on it. Like it sounded like you said earlier.
Yeah, that. What else can you do? You got to keep going forward. But there's a lot of something like that, especially a plane crash. There's a lot of triggers. The smells. You know. Just getting on an airplane flying over your head. There's a lot of different things that can bring you back there.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, the people, you know, I think the hardest thing for firefighters or any of us to deal with is seeing dead children, you know? So that was difficult to process, you know. It's just,
is there an apparatus in place for, you know, there's always been, a stigma with mental health, but at this point we know more than enough that we can stop this nonsense about, you know, masculinity or about not getting help or just swallowing it from combat to first responders. Do you think that FDNY, do you think that other fire departments across the country have an apparatus, have structures in place so that you, if you want, or even force you to seek mental health?
The FDNY does. They generally don't force you, but they can if they feel it's needed, or if the guys you work with feel it's needed. But we have a counseling unit. You can go there anytime, call there anytime. After tragic events, they come by right away. And then there's peer counseling, which is, for me, I think that's probably the most important.
Oh, you do like a group with a bunch of guys that have similar.
Well, yeah, they have that, but I'm just talking about it with the guys you were there with, or in the firehouse, or you know, just not tucking it away. You know, if the next day, or years later, just talking about it and letting it out. Because, like you said, you can't push it away, and that's what the studies are showing, is that if you do, it's only going to affect you physically.
Yeah.
Especially in the 9/11 community, the research is showing that PTSD is accelerating the illnesses. especially like Alzheimer's and cancers. They're all very aggressive, but there's also a connection to the fact that people are emotionally scarred. And I know a couple of people personally that have Alzheimer's, and during COVID, when they couldn't go for their counseling and to their groups, and that they were just getting worse, extremely quickly. They had to move out of New York just to go to places where they can physically go to a doctor because they were getting sick faster. And I believe in that, and that's why I do a podcast and I talk about this stuff. It's funny. My dad said to me the other day, he listened to one of the shows. He's like, I never knew that you had to do any of that. I'm like, well, I don't know. I'm not going to sit down and have a beer and just start talking to you about it. It's just easier because I was talking to another fireman. It's just easier. Yeah. That's why I think it's important that you do that. You talk to the people that were there and can understand. And I think that's probably the best thing you could do.
This episode with Tina Cosentino looks like it could help a lot of folks who are dealing with any kind of mental health issues, so that would be probably a great one to start with, or any other. I hope that folks will go check it out. And Rob, I'll let you go, but man, it's so great to connect with you this way, and I really appreciate you talking about your story. I know that's never easy, and I wish you the best. And if there's anything myself or anybody in our community can do to help you, and obviously promote the podcast, but any other way else, please just never hesitate to reach out. You got my number. I appreciate it, man.
All right, man. Cool. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, there goes Rob Serra. Check out the podcast, the Firefighters podcast, produced by Righteous Media, Paul Rykoff's outfit. Definitely go check that out, and follow Rob on Twitter as well. You can tell him that you heard him on the show. I'd really appreciate that. And I definitely hope to get him back whenever possible to talk about all these issues that he has been such a great advocate for. He's on Twitter at Sarah Rob, SERRAROB, at Sarah Rob. Let him know you heard him on the show, and give him a follow on Twitter. StayLow.us is the website as well. Okay, now it's time to get to my second guest of the show. This is from last Thursday night. We invited Peter Coyote to hang out with our weekly subscriber hangout. We do it every week. We don't always invite a guest, although we probably should, at least more often than I have been, because this is just a wonderful experience. You get the right guest who can hang, and that's exactly who Peter Coyote is. Of course, he was just on the show a couple weeks ago, and I'm sure you're familiar with him if you listen to anything I've done over my career, because he's always been a pretty regular guest of mine. Actor, activist, Zen Buddhist priest. He's got a new book out, which you can go get. It's called The Lone Ranger and Tonto Meet Buddha, Masks, Meditation, and Improvised Play to Induce Liberated States. It's amazing, and so is he. And I hope you will, just because he joined us tonight. He's an American legend. Of course, you know him as the voiceover actor for almost all of Ken Burns documentaries, and he began a film career in the 60s and 70s. And he's had just an amazing career in film and voiceover, of course, and he's won the awards and he's done the whole thing. And I love talking to him. This was so great, and it was so great to have a full audience of like over 80 listeners, I think, were there, or like 81 listeners at one point, subscribers, hanging out, asking questions, and now you get to listen to it. I hope to have you at the next one. Here it is, Peter Coyote, everybody. I got all the feelings. I'm feeling all the feelings. I got all the tingles. If you'll mute your microphone now, so we can get started, and we'll get started. But basically, Peter, I have had the great privilege and opportunity to ask you many questions and be in many conversations with you over the years. I consider you a personal friend because of what you did for me and my lowest point, and how much of your life you have shared with me. And when I visited you in your New York City hotel, I left my umbrella in your room, and I came right back to get it, and it was like you didn't even answer your door. And so I really feel like we need to start there. Why did you not give me my umbrella back?
I probably wasn't in the room anymore.
I don't know. I had just left.
Your umbrella. I got an umbrella. Have you left? I probably split. I mean, I don't know. How long ago was that? You've been sitting on that for what, 5-6 years? Shame on you.
No,
I'm sorry I was so late in. I didn't have a link. So I was using the link from our January 13th call. It didn't work. And finally, I got the email from you.
Hold on a second.
Keith! Peter Coyote didn't get the link! The hell's wrong with you?
I'm sorry. My fake producer is a 13-year-old child, and he sometimes sends the wrong emails. We are very happy that it worked out and you joined us here. And what I was trying to say was, enough. What I was trying to say was, I would love to turn this over to the folks that are here to be in dialogue with you, because believe it or not, there's some deep and thoughtful people that have been listening to you for a long time and they'd love to take a shot at the GOAT.
Well, please. I mean, I think both my fans are tuned in.
The modesty is almost too much to take from me. This man is obviously a huge person and presence in my life and has been for so many years. So I know a lot of people just, want to say hi or maybe even say thanks. But if you have a question, I would really love to hear your question. If you could be succinct as possible. It's exciting to talk to people like this in this case, but we'd love to get to, as many folks as we can. So don't Joe Manchin me, is all I'm trying to say. Don't Manchin me. Don't filibuster me.
You spell that Mansion. And you spell Kristen Cinema Cinema.
Right on.
That about says it all.
So here's the thing. There's a guy who contributes to my show every day. Peter, I do a show every day. He does a voiceover intro to the show, and he does a very funny news jingle. He's in school in San Francisco for voiceovers right now, and he's a great guy. And he'd really love to just ask you a voiceover question, if you wouldn't mind. And then
sure.
we'll get.
Do you know what school he's in?
Pete Co. You're on with Peter Coyote. What an unbelievable honor it is for you.
Yeah, I attend Voice One in San Francisco, founded by Elaine Clark.
I don't know it, but yeah. I give master classes at a school in Sausalito about 4 or 5 times a year called Voice Tracks. That's the only one I know because
I know Voice Tracks.
Well, Samantha and I have the same agent, so that's how we met. And then she works the same way I do, which is pretty much from the jump, which is like not a lot of rehearsing, just taking it off the page. And so I do a lot of acting improv and a lot of mask work to teach people how to get out of their own way, which is pretty much the biggest problem for everybody. Self-criticism, second guessing, trying to be good, trying to be like somebody else instead of being just authentic who you are.
I actually have not struggled with that myself.
I wouldn't tell anybody, man.
That's good to know. Well, no, my question actually was about that in terms of your acting background, vis-a-vis now that you're doing a lot of long form narration. I know you do obviously a lot of documentaries. My wife actually worked on a documentary that you narrated.
Oh, really?
She did. And my question is, what sort of this will probably bore everybody else here, so I apologize, but what sort of acting choices do you make when you do that kind of long form narration? Because when you're doing a commercial, like I'm training to do commercials, the acting choices are kind of like sometimes you play a character, so it's very specific to what you're trying to sell. But when you're narrating documentaries or doing any kind of long form narration, I guess I'm just kind of curious about what your thought process is when you.
So I don't make any acting choices when I'm doing long form, when I'm doing any documentary. I'll tell you a funny story about the first time I met Ken Burns. I had done a series called The West for the kids that had produced the Civil War for him. Yeah. And he liked that. And so he wanted me to do the national parks. And that was now 12 films ago. So we arranged to meet. I was in New York for something, and he came into the room. He had a big pile of scripts, and he had a big stack of DVDs, and he had a big box of highlighters, and he had a box of pencils and a big pile of yellow legal pads. And I said, "What is that?" And he said, well, that's, here's the DVD so you can watch the movie, and here's the script so you can take your notes and you can highlight. I said, oh, no, man, I just read it when I get in the studio. And there was a long glacial pause. I mean, the temperature dropped about 25 degrees. He said, well, that'll just never work. You don't know how impeccable I am. And I said, well, that's okay. You don't know how good I am. There was another glacial pause. And he said, all right, I'll rent a studio and I'll rent it for a month and we'll just do the best we can. I said, no, man, it's 9 hours. We'll do an hour and a half a day. We'll get it for 6 days. We'll be okay. And on day 3, he jumped up and he said, I'll never use anybody else. And that's a lie, because my friend Keith David, who's an African-American brother, he does like Jackie Robinson. He did jazz. He did baseball.
Platoon. He was in Platoon.
Yeah, he's married to my closest friend's sister. Anyway, the thing is that my feeling is the first time I read the text is when the images are the most vivid in my mind. And if I don't have to think about anything or fake anything, I don't want to put a foot in the small of your back. I want to be like an empty pipe transmitting to you, and let those images just naturally affect me. And you'll hear a human being speaking to you, and you'll respond to that human being. If I come in trying to tell you how tragic this is or how sad this is, well, my sorrow may not be your sorrow. And actually, when people do that to me, I get pissed off. It's like, come on, man, leave me some space. Let me find this. So I do a thing, though, for commercials. And I'm the only guy in the world that does this, as far as I know. So I'll tell you, I wrote a book that's just out this month called The Lone Ranger and Tonto Meet Buddha. And it's about all these classes at Voice Tracks where I push people to bump into the edges of themselves. You don't normally think about yourself. You don't see yourself as a choice, as a lifelong series of choices, which has become something like a warden. And we all get the idea that that self is fixed, like you have a little walnut under your liver with your name on it. But actually, your self is just an awareness. And I'm a Zen Buddhist priest. I've been studying this stuff for 45 years. So what I do is I run people through all these acting exercises, improv exercises, making them do things without thinking, without planning. And it's kind of stressful. And then about 3 or 4 hours in, I put a mask on them and I hold a mirror up to them. And when they see themselves in the mirror with a mask, they disappear. I mean, straight goods. They just go. And their brain assembles some persona from the mask, and they know everything about it. I can interview them. They'll know if that character has brothers, sisters, where he or she is from, and they just wig out. And with the exit of their everyday personality goes their second guessing, their self-consciousness. All that stuff disappears, and they're cold sober. And just to prove, I make them do it with 2 other different masks. So everybody does 3 masks, finds 3 characters. And I use it as a lost leader for Buddhism, saying if you want to recapture that sense of freedom in your life, you need to learn how to meditate. You need to learn a Buddhist description of reality. But here's a very practical affect, and I'll give you a 2-minute lesson so you can do it yourself. One day I was in the studio, and in the afternoon, I'd listen to people reading texts. And they were all good. They were all senior students. They were well-rounded and half an inch in diameter. Very professional, trying to be, good and be sold and stuff. And it was just boring the shit out of me. I knew that Sam wanted them to be better. They wanted to be better. So I said, hey, listen, read the text like one of the characters that you discovered in the mask today. And this girl did it, and it just blew everybody away. It was so alive. It was so on point. She was so like just playing jazz with the thing, catching all the innate music in it. And the class was looking at each other. Everybody was flipped out. Now, the problem was the voice wasn't appropriate. It was like Tony Soprano doing a Rolls-Royce ad. So I said, okay, now read it in your own voice. And all the stuff she found came through. So I'm going to give you a little thing to try at home. Take your cell phone and just turn away and make a goofy face, any kind of face you want, and photograph it. And now look at that face and just put a voice to it and put an identity to it. And then just read some text you're having a problem with. And don't worry about being good or bad, because it won't be you. And all your personality is about this big, and it floats in infinite space. And when you get out of the way, infinite space comes in and gives you infinite choices. So just try this. And if you don't like that character, take another face, take another photograph of it. This is what I've had to do with Zoom when I can't go out and actually put masks on people. And I promise you that your imagination and who you actually authentically are is going to be more interesting than anything you dream up. All you've got to do is learn to step aside and surrender to whatever's in there. A whole lifetime of watching that your brain scrambles to put to this new face. It's just scanning its memory cells and saying, what is this? And it's going to come up with a composite person. And that person will make all the discoveries. And then you can just do it again in your own voice. And you can reach out to Pete. He'll put you in touch with me. You tell me if it doesn't work.
I won't do that. I will not. And also, The Lone Ranger and Tonto Meet Buddha. That's the book that Peter just referenced. I just threw a link in the chat, and you can buy it at IndieBound, and you should buy it because he joined us. I do want to say before I get to the next question, a super awkward and very honest thing, and I hope, Peter, you don't mind. Right there at the end when you were talking, I came.
Shame on you. I don't mind. I'm sitting in another room, man.
No, not shame on you.
Go change your shorts.
It was just to see you here and to have you here and to be hosting you is just a wonderful, wonderful honor for me. I wrote in the chat, I'm peak happy to have you here. To hear you, talk to this amazing community of human beings is just absolutely wonderful. Let's switch gears, though, and get to a question. Mark, are you there? Mark Nolte in Iowa, my good friend Mark, who has hosted me in his own home, has a really interesting question that's much different than what Pete Coe just said. You there, Mark? Where are you? I don't see you.
I am. Hey, Pete. How are you?
Hey, buddy. It's great to are you in your car? You've been...
I am. I'm sitting outside waiting for Eli to come out of he's doing some training thing.
Eli is related to Nick?
Yes, unfortunately.
I did. Are you really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did a film with him. We had a good time together. He's wonderful.
Wait, you're related to Nick Nolte, Mark?
Yeah, we're distant cousins. Yeah, he's from Iowa originally.
Peter,
I went to school in Iowa.
You did? Where?
I went to Grinnell College.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it changed my life.
Peter, Mark Nolte, who you're talking to, is a pretty big guy in Iowa. He almost ran for governor. He's a pretty well-known fellow there, and I'm very happy to have him joining us. Mark, what's your question for the GOAT?
Well, thank you for all that you offer, and that last 15 minutes of the last interview was unbelievable. I think I've listened to that 10 times. I think that should just be a standalone video somewhere. But I just, as a kid growing up I was brought up in the Lutheran church, and at the time Christianity seemed so sane and normal. And I'm just wondering, from your perspective, what the hell happened? How did we get to this bizarre version of religion that is so cult-like and not in keeping with any real scripture or basis anymore? And where do you see it going?
Well, I sometimes say the real problem with Buddhism is that there's people in it. and you can say that for everything. I mean, I never thought I would ever hear that Buddhists were burning Muslims alive in Myanmar. There is nothing that people can't pervert. And I think what most people have trouble with, especially people from the Abrahamic religions, from Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, is that they're religions that are based on contradictions. There's good and evil, there's God and man. And so you're always squared trying to figure out which side of this thing am I on? What's the good way to walk? Buddhism is not a contradiction, it's a unity. So although you're over there and I'm over here and we're apparently separate, neither of us have ever been free from oxygen, from sunlight, from water, from microbes in the soil that fed us, from pollinating insects, from people growing, spinning, sewing the cotton that you're wearing. So we're all like ticks on the body of a dog. And one thing that makes it a little easier for Buddhists to do is to find commonalities. Like we know from Jump Street, everybody wants to live. And so that's a kind of, if you remind yourself of that, that will help you find a certain amount of compassion, a certain amount of commonality with anybody on earth. They want to live. So do you. So one of the things that happens is that people forget that a human being is like a radio that's tuned to the human spectrum. And anything that any human can feel, think, say, or do can blow through. So it can be Pol Pot, it can be Mother Teresa, it can be Donald Trump, it can be Martin Luther King Jr. The spinal telephone is open and it can come through. But if you think that you're the good guys, then you stop monitoring your shadow side. So, for instance, I was on the Bill Maher show the night we invaded Baghdad, did shock and awe on Baghdad. And I said, well, this is a war crime, you know. We're bombing hotels in the middle of the night filled with men, women, and children because we don't like their leader. Suppose the Mexicans decided that John Gotti was a threat to their culture as a drug dealer and bombed Brooklyn. So we forget because we start out saying we're the good guys. That means everything we do is good. So we stop looking. So if you're a Christian, if you're an evangelical, if you've heard the good news, if you go to church every Sunday and you don't sleep with Boy Scouts and you don't beat your wife, you can say, I'm a good guy. And you don't have to look much farther than that. Whereas Buddhists know how dangerous we can be. And so our responsibility is to monitor all the time. The Buddha gave us something called an eightfold path, which is, right view, right livelihood, right speech. And we have to be checking that out all the time. Am I living my life in the way that the Buddha would model? I don't hear a lot of people saying that about Jesus or Moses, thank God, who was a murderous SOB. So I think that what happens is we immediately get siloed. We think we're the good guys. We're on the right side. So the guys inside the Capitol on 1-6 and the people reporting on it outside on 1-6, they both think they're the good guys. They're both laying down morality based on different evidence. Some of it is perhaps objective and some of it's made up for political purposes. So I go back to a time when there were 3 networks. There was ABC, CBS, and NBC. And Bill Paley, the head of CBS, said to his reporters, don't worry about money. I have Jack Benny to make me money. CBS News was like the hood ornament on a Rolls Royce. It was just there to show the value of the station. And these guys, Edward R. Murrow and these guys, Walter Cronkite, they were revered by the nation. They were the standard of evidence. They were the standard of information. And the United States shared common facts. Now you've got 672,000 little outlets, and anybody with a microphone can command a platform. There's no punishment for lying over the public airwaves. I mean, just think about that. Rupert Murdoch runs a 24-hour-a-day propaganda station on the public airwaves.
Not allowed to say his name on the show, Peter.
I'm not? Well, Rupert Murdoch runs this 24-hour-a-day propaganda network, right? And millions of people listen to it. You know they're not registered as news. I suppose everybody knows that. They're registered as entertainment because they could actually be sued claiming to be news. So you multiply that by Facebook and the algorithms of Facebook and Twitter, where they link everybody together like with like, and suddenly you're in a bubble of people that think the same and see the same stuff, and you feel that your worldview is objective. So I don't know if y'all saw that movie called The Social Contract, in which the vice presidents of Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram said, we've created a monster and we're fearing civil war.
The social dilemma.
Social dilemma. Thank you. So we have completely balkanized the country. So I don't know how we get out of it. I really don't know until I see maybe Trump in a perp walk and a jumpsuit and his children in a jumpsuit.
Oh,
all those people that enabled, all of the big guys,
Three orgasms within 7 minutes is a new record for me.
Yeah. So, somewhere there's got to be a reckoning. And I'm just hoping the Justice Department comes through. And, Steve Bannon, if I was in charge of the Justice Department, I would have kicked in his door at 3 a.m, hooded him and taken him to an undisclosed location and said, you want to live in an autocratic society without rules? This is how it operates.
That's 4.
Let your friends figure out where you are. So until there's some reckoning for some of these people, Rudy Giuliani, Steve Bannon, Mark McCarthy, Kevin McCarthy, and the chief of staff of the White House,
Mark Meadows.
Mark Meadows, thank you. I don't think we're going to see much change. And the danger, of course, is that in broad daylight, they are choosing the selectors of the electors. And, you've got 2 Republicans in Democrats' clothing who are blocking voting rights. You can't get more basic than everybody gets a vote. And it's not fair to blame it on Sinema and Manchin, because there's 50 Republicans and not one will stand forward and be the man or woman that took the oath to defend the Constitution. So I anticipate a certain amount of violence and bloodshed, and we can look like the streets of Yemen and Afghanistan in short order, because we're the same species and we have the same mind and the same impulses. And when they get cut loose of the guardrails, it's Iraq, it's Syria.
The Quip electric toothbrush is available right now at quip.com/standupwithpete, folks. Sorry, I got to break in there for an ad, but what Peter Coyote just said was so tragic and terrible. I felt the need to
brush your teeth. Brush my teeth, man. Shame on me.
Peter Coyote, how much more time do you give us?
I don't know. What time is it?
Well, we all have 6 hours left, so whatever you want.
Oh, no.
Okay.
I rushed in here from walking my dogs, and I haven't fed them yet. So let's say another 15 minutes or so.
You hear that, folks? Very generous. Okay. So we've got a lot of hands that are raised, Peter. The Zoom allows you to raise a hand.
I see. Yeah, no, I understand Zoom. I'm not using a Dixie cup and a thread.
Well, first of all, I wasn't insinuating that. Also, you came here to help me gain subscribers for which you'll be paid nothing. I've lost money because of your comments earlier about Moses. Do you want to clear up your beef?
Well, I mean, if you read the Old Testament, listen, I'm a Jew, man. My people are Sephardic Jews from North Africa. My grandfather's from Kazakhstan, who was a murderous guy who killed his horse with a hammer when it bit him. I went to Mongolia to watch the eagle hunters to figure out why my father and grandfather were the meanest sons of bitches on earth. And I know now, If you live in that country, you've got to be tough. So if you look at the Old Testament, I mean, the Jews were like thieving, stealing, slaving, adulterous, murderous people. You could beat your wife with a stick the size of your thumb. Now, at the same time, they also invented God, monotheism, justice, and were writing poems while the Angles and the Celts and the Gauls were painting their faces blue and living in trees. So I'm proud of that stuff. But Moses was not a pussy. He was a mean and perhaps deluded dude.
You gotta watch out for those Red Sea pedestrians.
Yeah.
I actually just got 17 new subscribers when you said Moses was not a pussy.
So that's
I appreciate it.
And one more orgasm.
Yeah,
I was once trapped in a motel in Wendover, Utah, for
with
a
Moses
of bad rain, and in this particular Bible, Jesus's words were in red ink, and I had nothing to do, so I just read it from the New Testament from lid to lid with Jesus's words in red ink, and he was a radical, and I think one of the reasons that they made him so miraculous was to make it so people wouldn't imitate him. So they said, well, God, I can't be like Jesus, man. I can't turn water into wine. I can't, turn a stick into a snake. I'll just have to bumble along. But there's nothing that Jesus ever said that anyone else could not do. And I'll tell you one thing he never said, which was that he was the only Son of God. He just said he was the Son of God. He didn't say you weren't. He didn't absolve you of the responsibility for living a godly life. Just saying.
Well, he said he was the Son of God. So I think he was a little bit arrogant.
Maybe.
But there's some.
But I would say you're the Son of God.
Translation.
I'd say I'm the Son of God. Well, yeah. You know that in Hebrew, there is no word in Hebrew for virgin. The word is young, unmarried woman. So the Christians did not get that story straight until the Council of Nantes, 300 years after the death of Jesus. There were guys running around saying that Jesus came out of Mary's ear, and they had to get the story together, and they did. But these were people. This stuff was not faxed down by God. These were human beings, and they're just like you. And just like I am Buddha, so are you. And you're just like the people that wrote the Bible. They weren't a special species of people. And then it went through the Warren Commission of the King James Version in the time of Shakespeare, and they got together and they pushed the Gnostic stuff aside, and they came to political adjustment. And you read the King James Bible, you're reading an adjustment made by humans. It's not infallible. We have to figure out the way to behave, from the clues we get.
Do you think Jesus was pretty dark-skinned?
I'm sure Jesus was dark-skinned. I have members of my family that are dark-skinned from North Africa. My people are Samaritans, which is like a small sect of the Jews that wear Arab clothing and, rugheads and stuff. They are dark.
I had a dark-skinned college roommate. Let's move on to the next question. Joe Leota. As long as the black people are laughing, we're good.
Are you related to Ray?
I'm not related, unfortunately. Okay. But my wife is Jewish.
Okay, that's a good sign. Condolences.
Very good. I have a question for you. So in the podcast, which somebody mentioned before, the last one you were on, it was so interesting the last couple of minutes when you went through the whole idea of meditation and the affliction and the water.
Oh, the Four Noble Truths.
Yes, that was really, really moving to me, and it really spoke to me. But I played for my wife, and she mentioned something that was kind of interesting, that, if everybody suffers, and as everybody goes through some sort of suffering and some sort of trauma in their life, you had mentioned that they tend to do undignified behaviors.
When they flee from it.
Peter, I hate to jump in here. I want to hear what you have to say with Joe, but I just want you to know this man has bought me 14 pair of pants and given them me in person. Go ahead, Peter.
Is that because you keep coming in them?
They are waterproof, yes, stain-proof. But my question for you was, do you think that those people who do those behaviors can just meditate their way out of it? Or is there any sort of therapy first prior to that?
That's a good question, man. You know, I was a heroin addict for 10 years. And believe me, I got to a place where I woke up one morning and the guy I was across the table with was dead.
Wow.
And I was a single father of a daughter, and it just scared the crap out of me. I realized if I had died, my daughter would go to the state, go to the home. And that day I called a script croaker that I knew, a doctor that was kind of straight guy, and I got enough Dolafine to clean up and get over the sicknesses. And then I called 6 psychotherapists. I interviewed them till I found one guy I wanted to be like. And then I started sitting Zazen. I was dating a girl who I later married and started actual formal sitting, which I'd never done. I just read a lot about Buddhism. And I think there's a real synchronicity between therapy and meditation. Meditation does not solve everything. And there are people that have described psychotherapy and analysis as the compassion of the West. There's something there. And when you have traumas of a certain kind of obdurate nature and they're just really resistant, there's a lot of utility in talk therapy and these 2 new therapies, which are short term. One's called DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, and the other one's called cognitive behavior therapy, which teaches you how to deal with symptoms. They don't go all the way back to the Freudian idea of like, we'll just release this demon and it'll be okay, because sometimes you can't. They were pre-verbal, they were pre-ego. But no, I'm a big believer that, so the word that, there's a wonderful book that explains what Joe is talking about. It's called The Feeling Buddha. And it's written by an Englishman called David Brazier, Brazier. And it's the clearest, most cogent restatement of what the Buddha said and taught, the Four Noble Truths, which was the first lesson he taught after his enlightenment. And this guy goes right back to the original Sanskrit. The word suffering is a translation done by Christian translators. And the word that Brazier settles on, which is more appropriate and more useful, is affliction. Everybody lives in a kind of peppered wind. Shit happens to us. It's not our fault, you know? It's like living in a sandstorm. And the reason that Buddha called it a noble truth is he wanted you to know it's not your fault. You're not suffering because you're spiritually deficient. You're not suffering because you're a moron. It's the nature of human existence. And so truth means real. First of all, real. And noble means worthy of respect, dignified. So what happens is stuff comes and hits us. The first noble truth is affliction. The second noble truth is arising, samudaya in Sanskrit. And what it means is when a guy cuts us off in the car, we want to shoot him. Or when we get too cold, we want to move closer to the fire. It's like an energetic response. It's not your fault either. It's not a problem. It's not because you're spiritually undeveloped. So the third one is the first one that you can do something about. And it's called nirodha. It means containment. So it means when you're afflicted and stuff arises, you learn by meditating, by understanding the insubstantiality of these things that you consider physical forces, that you can contain it. Now, people that don't learn that, the bars are full of them. The gambling halls are full of them. They're having illicit affairs.
Yeah.
There's nothing dignified about being a drunk. There's nothing dignified about cheating on your wife or your husband. So people are doing this because they're panicked and because they don't know how to contain it. once you practice meditating and once you develop the strength and the courage to know that you can contain whatever comes up, then the Buddha has a prescription for you, which is the fourth noble truth, which is the eightfold path. And it's a prescription where you ask the Buddha in you, is this right speech? Is this right employment? Is this the right way of looking at things? And what he wanted to enlist you in was a huge game, a huge drama of saving all beings. And he had to get you enlightened so that you saw the interdependence of all things, so that you realized that yourself was insubstantial. It was just an awareness. There was nothing to defend. So he could get you out there helping people. So I recommend this book because it's no nonsense. This guy, David Brazer, is a psychotherapist, and he's a priest in a Pure Land Buddhist sect, whose objective is to create a pure land on earth by modeling the Buddha's life. Sorry, that was long-winded, but
Peter Coyote.
Thank you.
Joe, tell Peter very quickly, if you could, what it's like to see me eat a plate of nachos.
So I've been fortunate or unfortunate enough to have gone to dinner with Pete, and when the plate of nachos is placed within distance of his reaching distance, he attacks it like a coyote would attack a maimed antelope on the plains of Africa. Mm-hmm. Goes in, doesn't even come up for air, has sour cream. His beard he has, the white, it's now covered in sour cream.
That's right.
And is unabashed about it and owns it. And it's amazing.
It sounds horrifying, actually.
That's my truth.
So, you know what I want for my price tag for showing up here? Before I leave, when it's time to go, I want to tell a Jewish joke because that's my favorite. That's my favorite kind of joke. There's a website called Old Jews Telling Jokes, which looks like everybody in my family.
I actually own that domain name, which is really kind of corrupt, but it's good. Do you want to do it now, or do you want to take another question? Your call, buddy.
I'll take another question.
Joby Tapia is also in Northern California, or somewhere near you. How many miles are you from? Well, we don't want to tell where Peter's located because he'll be droned immediately. But you're in Northern California. You're on the air with Peter Coyote. Joby, make it good.
You know, I unfortunately I don't even have a question. It's just I live in the little village that Mr. Coyote used to live in before he left, and I completely understand why you left. And I just want to say that I miss having you around, and I used to run into you every once in a while on the bike path out there and talk to you and say hello, and we just miss you down here.
Yeah, you know, I found when I was waking up every morning and saying "start the killing," I thought it was time to move.
You know, they have changed the first part of the town name from Mill to Me.
Yeah, it stopped being a little. You know, I got there in the 60s, and the rock and roll invasion was pretty beneficent, and pretty much people got curdled into the stew. And then around the time of the tech boom, you know, 30-year-olds who solved the money thing, as they put it, were outbidding you $200,000 cash for a little house you wanted. And then they started changing the traffic lights and the stop sign so that I could no longer turn left to go directly into town from my little street. I had to go just a circuitous route. And I spoke to somebody from the highway department one day, and this woman said, "We told them. We told them what was." And from that point on, I just start the killing.
Yeah.
Now I just say it to the Daily News.
Hey, did you ever know that rock photographer Suki that lived up the hill?
All right.
Is Suki Asian African American woman?
No, she's a little tiny white woman, but she used to take all the pictures at the Sweetwater. She had an amazing portfolio.
Also,
I might have. I played the Sweetwater a couple times, but I knew another Suki who was a videographer.
Nice, yeah. Well, anyway, we all miss you. That's all I wanted to say.
Thanks so much, man. Thanks. I miss Mill Valley.
Fuck Mill Valley. Mill Valley strong. So, Peter, on the set of E.T., I'm kidding. So, do you want to do your joke? Do you want to take another question?
I'll take two more questions.
Oh, my God.
I want to tell one of my jokes.
Oh, my God.
Because if I get started with jokes, I'm very hard to stop.
Well, nobody wants
I'm sorry, Joby. No more questions from you unless your dog can participate.
That's right. Joby,
do you see my dogs behind me?
No.
Yeah, my dog is over there on the couch.
Do you want to go feed him? If you want to go feed him, we'll wait. I mean, just for the record. Okay.
No, I'm not coming back when I leave. This 8:00, my brain turns off. I watch my TV and my series.
What are you watching?
Well, I've burned through everything. So I just finished The Club, which was a Turkish series.
Oh, yeah, I watched that.
I watched Hacks, which is my friend Gene Smart, which is really, really funny.
Yeah.
I've got favorites. Fauda was one of my favorites. All right,
let me just jump in then. Let me just ask you. This has gotten very deep. Could you just tell us a Hollywood story?
A Hollywood story?
I mean, if you don't want to, I'll go to another question. Your call.
No, the reason I haven't been able to write a book about Hollywood is because I would have to tell the truth. And when you own the soapbox, it's unkind. You can't just trash people.
Can I just let me indulge real quick. John Carroll, would you just say hello or anything to Pete? John Carroll's a legend. You're a legend. I
know who John Carroll is.
You do?
Hey, well, you probably know the other John Carroll that maybe writes for the San Francisco Chronicle.
Yes. Oh, that's who I thought you were.
Yeah,
there's too young.
Every John Carroll there is either a musician or a writer. So I'm proud of my name.
Cool. Which are you?
I'm the musician.
Oh, cool.
Starland, Peter Coyote, Starland Vocal Band. Peter?
Well, I tell you, Peter, I've played Sweetwater as well. And Suki's pictures are up on the wall in that place, right?
Yeah, there's one of me up there. I mean,
yeah, cool.
I played with my friend Michael White was Huey Lewis's bass player, and he's a standard guy there. And I've been a amateur singer-songwriter my entire life. I was playing guitar since I was 16, and I'd rather be a talented amateur than a second-rate pro. So I keep it under wraps.
By the way,
it's like me in screenwriting.
By the way,
that's a tough master.
Peter Coyote, by the way, just jump in here. We do have a song written for you and about you, a jingle for your appearance on this show, and it's a minute and 8 seconds long. It's written by a very talented guy. I mean, John Carroll is a Grammy Award-winning member of the Starland Vocal Band and Afternoon Delight. That's who you're talking to, Pete.
I'm going to look up the band, man.
Yeah,
I'm sorry I didn't know it.
You know,
you might
band.
come in your pants.
Oh, wow, wow. Well, by the way, to be fair, I only made like that comment about orgasms because I've heard Peter Coyote's poetry. But anyway, let me just play this jingle. Can I play it, Peter, for you?
Yeah.
This is written by a listener. Is Gareth here?
Yeah, I saw his name.
Gareth is here.
He's busy making chocolate milk.
I've been making dinner.
Do you want to
listen in?
Do you want to say anything? Should I just press play?
Oh no, I was just after Peter was on the other day. I was just had all these thoughts swimming in my head and wanted to write something down. So it's not perfect. I just kind of recorded it real quick and.
Super talented singer-songwriter, percussionist.
You're playing it.
Gareth Sever.
It's probably better than the last song I wrote, which was called Let's Shove Christmas Up Santa's Ass.
That was...
They're neck and neck.
Okay.
Here we go. You hear it, Peter?
Yeah.
Peter Coyote. His voice sounds like a melody I remember as a child. Gruff, sincere, mild, as old as he Fine big mind, open up your eyes. You are the universe inside. Sit within whatever arises in your mind. Let yourself free, listening to Peter Coyote.
Wow.
Gareth Sever.
Except for the very old part. I love that.
The sustain was amazing.
Yeah, that was good, man. All right, I'm going to tell you guys a joke.
All right, here we go.
This is a joke that often clears rooms. This is a joke that determines whether or not I can be friends with people. So I'm just starting right in the deep water, okay? So here it goes. Ruti and Moish were married 50 years. They hated each other. It was terrible. It was a bloodletting every day. One day, Ruti comes to Moish. She says, Moish, I want a divorce. I hate this. He says, you want a divorce? You got a divorce. We'll take a taxi. We'll see Milton, the lawyer. It's over. She said, I wouldn't ride in a taxi with you. We'll take 2 taxis. He says, all right, 2 taxis it is. So they get in 2 taxis. He's following her taxi. Her taxi goes through an intersection. It gets smacked by a bus. He jumps out. He says, quick, quick, take her to Dr. Wolf. Only Dr. Wolf can see her. I'll deal with the police and the paper. I'll be right there. Quick, Dr. Wolf. So it takes him about 45 minutes to get through with stuff. He runs to the hospital. He runs up to the 6th floor. He's fessing. He's walking back and forth. He looks down the hall. The doors to surgery open. Guy comes out in green scrubs and a mask, pulls the mask down. It's Dr. Wolf. He goes running up. He says, Dr. Wolf, how is Ruti? Dr. Wolf says, oh, Moish, it's very bad. No, it's very bad. I wouldn't kid you. Her neck is broken back here, and she's paralyzed from there down. She's incontinent. You're going to have to change her diapers every 20, 30 minutes. I had to put a colostomy bag on her. It's a very bad fit. She's leaking. It's really a mess in that bed, honestly. You're going to have to chew her food for her, and you're going to have to rock her back and forth in the bed so she doesn't get bed sores. Moish goes, oh, my God, it's terrible. Dr. Wolf goes, I'm fucking with you. She's dead.
Oh, shit. That's my favorite joke in the world.
Oh, shit.
See, this is a good group.
That's terrible.
Ladies and gentlemen, Peter Coyote, hands in front of cameras.
Thanks, guys. Thank you so much for making me welcome.
Peter,
much love.
Peter,
love you. Good night, buddy.
We love you, brother. We love you.
I'll see you again. This is so much fun.
Thank you.
Please come back.
I'll tell you one more.
Oh, good.
Bonus encore.
Moish goes into a bar. He puts a little frog on the bar with the woman bartender. She says, what's that? He says, that's my frog. She says, I know it's a frog. What's it doing on my bar? He says, young lady, a little respect. This frog gives the best cunnilingus in the world. She says, what are you talking about? He says, don't take my word. He throws her the frog. Take the frog upstairs, take off all your clothes, lay down on the bed, put the frog on your belly button, pointing down there, and hold on, young lady. She goes, I'm going to try that. He goes upstairs. She comes back. Nothing. He says, you must not have done what I said. You took off all your clothes? She says, yes. He says, your socks? She says, no, I didn't take my... Upstairs, take off all the clothes, take off the socks, put the frog on the belly button, pointing down there, hold on to the bed. She goes up. She comes back about 10 minutes later, nothing. He goes, you're doing something. I don't know what it is. I'm an old man. I'll stand in the corner. I'll just coach. All right. So he goes, he stands in the corner. He's standing there. He says, take off your clothes. So she takes off the clothes. He says, okay, the socks. Don't forget the socks. She says, okay, put the frog on your belly. No, turn it around, the nose of the frog pointing down there. Okay, hold on. He holds on. She looks at him, nothing. He's enraged. He grabs the frog. All right, I'm going to show you one more time. That's what I do in my spare time. All right, guys, I'm going to go feed my dogs. Thanks a lot.
Peter Coyote, we honor you. We honor you. Thank you.
See you later. Thanks. You guys are great.
Thank you, sir.
I'm out of here.
He's trying to leave. He finally figured out how to leave.
Mic drop.
My God. Wow. I don't know what to say. That
you
was
recorded that, I'm hoping.
No, it's
what
not.
Just happened?
The whole thing is recorded.
The whole thing's recorded. I've got it all, and he's 80, and consider yourself lucky. What a wonderful experience. I read the chat. I mean, Matt Carlson upgraded his Patreon subscription. Like it's...
I'm not fucking with you. I totally doubled it already.
And all right, well, there it is. That's it, folks. That's the end of the tape. The rest of it is in the archives forever. And if you enjoyed that as a listener, I'd love to know. And if you enjoyed it, if you were there, I'd love to know, because I'd like to do more of that and share it with you if it's cool. I've also got the video. I'm going to share that with subscribers from that night that you can watch, which is pretty cool. So I'll try to get that up in the Patreon email or website, patreon.com/Pete Dominic. If you're not already supporting the podcast with a paid subscription, please consider it right now. I've got a lot more folks listening, so I hope to get a lot more folks subscribing as well. You can also go to standupwithpete.com. John Carroll was there the other night, as was Pete Coe. Gave them a big thanks. But here is John Carroll right now singing this out. I hope you have a great Monday, and I hope to hear from you soon, tomorrow, maybe today, whatever. We'll see you on the Discord platform if you want to. You're never alone if you're a stand-up community member. John Carroll, sing us out. Let's wrap it up.
Stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.